The Cavendish mansion stood on the hill like a quiet monument to success, 12,000 square feet of marble, glass, and silence. From a distance, it looked perfect, but inside those walls, perfection was about to shatter. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those rare days when the sun didn't seem rushed. The golden light dripped through the windows, brushing against the portraits of a smiling family: Ethan Cavendish, one of the most respected billionaires in the city, and his two children, Lily and Max. Lily was 7, curious, gentle, her laughter like bells in spring. Max, just 5, had inherited his father's calm eyes and quiet curiosity. Their mother had passed away 3 years earlier, a loss that had left a hole no money could fill. Since then, the mansion had been watched over by Grace Turner, the family's longtime housekeeper. She had started with them over a decade ago, when Ethan was still building his empire. She had fed Lily as a baby, walked Max to his first day of preschool. To Ethan, she wasn't staff, she was family, or so he believed. That afternoon, Ethan's private jet landed hours ahead of schedule. He had cut short a meeting in Zurich. Something inside him had whispered that he needed to be home. He couldn't explain it, but fathers sometimes don't need reasons, just instincts. As the driver pulled up the gravel driveway, Ethan felt a sense of warmth, the rare kind that comes from knowing you're about to see the people who make life worth living. He imagined Lily running into his arms, Max climbing onto his lap, their laughter echoing through the halls. He smiled. He was tired of boardrooms and numbers. He wanted his children, but inside the mansion, there was no laughter, only voices, sharp, cold, and breaking something that shouldn't be broken. Lily, Max, stop laughing and kneel properly. Grace's voice snapped like a whip, slicing through the still air. Lily's giggle turned into a whimper. We're sorry, Miss Grace. We didn't mean to. Sorry. Grace spat the word. You think sorry fixes everything? You're sitting in a mansion you don't deserve. Look at this room: gold, velvet, silk. Do you even know what real work is? Her voice trembled, not from anger, but from envy. Decades of quiet resentment finally boiling over. Lily tried to speak, but Grace stepped closer. Your father built an empire, and you just play all day. Do you think that's fair, while people like me serve you, invisible and forgotten? Max, small and frightened, pressed his face into his hands. His tiny shoulders shook. Grace's eyes, once soft and maternal, now burned with something darker. Kneel properly, she hissed. Hands together. Say thank you for everything you didn't earn. Outside the bedroom door, Ethan froze. His hand still rested on the doorknob, but his body wouldn't move. For a moment, he didn't understand what he was hearing. His mind refused to believe it. Grace? His Grace? The woman who had promised to protect his children? Then he heard it again, the sound of his daughter's quiet sob. That sound broke him. He leaned slightly, just enough to see through the cracked door, and what he saw, he would never forget. Grace stood over them, her face twisted in bitterness. The children knelt on the floor beside their scattered toys. Lily's hands trembled as she tried to clasp them together. Max looked up at Grace with confusion more than fear, as if still hoping she'd turn back into the kind woman he knew. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. Rage crawled through his veins, but he didn't move. Not yet. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, not for revenge, but for truth. His phone. He pressed record. Every word, every cruel command, every tear, he captured it all. Grace's voice grew harsher. Your father doesn't care about you. He just buys your love. Do you think he'll always be there? Men like him never are. Ethan's breath caught. That was the moment the betrayal became undeniable. For a man who had built empires, nothing hurt more than realizing his home had become a stage for cruelty. The very woman who'd once rocked his children to sleep was now poisoning their innocence. And yet, Ethan's face remained still, cold, focused, because this was no longer just anger, it was evidence. He watched, silent, as Grace pushed further, her envy spiraling out of control. You should thank me, she hissed. I'm teaching you how the world really works. People like me serve, people like you take. That's the truth. Then, footsteps. Grace froze. The children turned. Ethan stepped through the door. The room went still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Grace's lips parted. Mr. Cavendish, I didn't know you were. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He held up his phone. The red recording light still blinked. Grace's face went pale. Ethan's voice, when it finally came, was low and measured, the kind that carried more power than a shout ever could. Grace, he said softly, what exactly are you teaching my children? Grace tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Lily clung to her father's arm, trembling. Ethan crouched, wiping the tears from her cheek. His jaw tightened, the calm before the storm. And in that moment, Grace knew her time in that mansion was over. But Ethan didn't explode. He didn't need to, because justice, when delivered by someone who truly understands power, doesn't come in noise, it comes in quiet certainty. He looked at her once, then whispered, "Leave." Grace backed away, stammering, eyes wide with fear. She had thought her secret cruelty would stay hidden. She had thought the master of the house would never know. But the truth had a way of finding light, even in the darkest rooms. As the front door clicked shut behind her, Ethan stood in silence. The mansion felt heavier now, tainted by betrayal. He turned to his children, kneeling down beside them, and as Lily buried her face in his chest, Ethan realized this was not just about firing a maid. It was about reclaiming something far more sacred, the safety of his home. Before we go deeper into this story, I just want to say, I worked really hard to bring you this story. If you want more stories that make you feel something, please subscribe, it really helps me keep creating for you. Grace was gone by sundown, but her presence lingered like a ghost. The house, usually alive with the sound of children, felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that seeps under your skin. Ethan sat in his study that night, the dim light of his desk lamp painting tired shadows across his face. In front of him, his phone replayed the recording, Grace's voice, cold and venomous, every word stabbed deeper than the last. He watched it again, and again, not because he needed proof, he already had that, but because he couldn't stop asking himself how it had come to this. For 10 years, Grace had been more than a housekeeper. She'd been there when Lily took her first steps. She'd been the one Max ran to when he scraped his knee. She'd been family, and family wasn't supposed to do this. Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch, but it trembled in his hand. Wealth, power, the endless meetings and headlines, all of it meant nothing now, because in the quiet heart of his empire, injustice had been allowed to grow, disguised as loyalty. He looked toward the staircase, where Lily and Max slept under the soft glow of their nightlight. He'd checked on them 3 times already. Max still whimpered in his sleep. Lily still clung to her stuffed bear. But the more Ethan thought, the more he realized, Grace's cruelty didn't begin today. It had roots, subtle, poisonous roots. He remembered the odd things his daughter had said over the past months. "Daddy, Grace says you don't like coming home. Grace says we shouldn't ask for new toys, we should be grateful." He had brushed it off as discipline, maybe even humility. But now, he knew better. She hadn't just scolded them. She'd been rewriting the story of who their father was, turning love into guilt, presence into absence, and that wasn't something you could erase with one apology. The next morning, Ethan made a call, not to his lawyers, not to the press, but to Daniel Moore, his head of security. He trusted Daniel, they'd known each other since college. "I need everything you can find on Grace Turner," Ethan said quietly. "Background checks, old references, financial records, everything." Daniel hesitated. "You think this was planned?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "I think envy doesn't work alone. It feeds on something bigger." Days turned into a tense blur. Grace had vanished from the city, no trace, no calls, but the footage had already begun circulating in private circles. Somehow, the story had leaked. A headline appeared on an obscure gossip blog. "Billionaire father secretly records longtime maid, leaked footage sparks controversy." Within hours, social media turned it into a storm. Some defended Ethan, he was protecting his kids, but others twisted it. He exploited a poor woman's breakdown. Typical billionaire, using his power to crush the working class. Ethan had never cared for public opinion, but this time it was different, because every lie they spread, every distorted post, would eventually reach Lily and Max, and he couldn't protect them from everything. That's when the true weight of injustice began to show itself, not just the cruelty of one person, but the way society loves to punish those who try to expose it. Grace, hidden somewhere behind a lawyer in a sob story, filed a defamation claim. She argued that Ethan had violated her privacy, that he had emotionally manipulated her. The audacity was breathtaking. His legal team told him not to worry, the evidence was undeniable. But Ethan wasn't naive, he knew what money could buy. He knew that sometimes, truth loses to narrative. As the weeks passed, Ethan's children began to withdraw. Lily stopped laughing as much, Max became quiet, his drawings darker, stick figures with tears. Ethan would kneel beside them, trying to reach through the fear Grace had planted. "You don't have to be scared anymore," he whispered one night. "No one will hurt you again." But Lily just shook her head. "Grace said you'd say that." Those words broke him. He realized that justice wasn't just about punishing Grace, it was about rebuilding trust with his children, and that was going to take more than wealth or authority. It would take patience and heart. Meanwhile, Daniel's investigation uncovered something shocking. Grace hadn't just been resentful, she'd been contacted. Months ago, a tabloid journalist had paid her for insider details on the Cavendish family. She'd sold small stories at first, harmless gossip, but they'd fueled her bitterness. They'd told her she deserved more. They'd flattered her ego, whispered that she was the real caretaker, the real victim. Ethan listened in silence as Daniel handed him the report. It wasn't just betrayal, it was corruption, bought and paid for, and his family had been the stage for it. Ethan stared out the window that night, rain streaking the glass like veins of sorrow. He could see his reflection, a man of wealth and power who suddenly felt powerless. He whispered to himself, "How did I build so much, and still fail to see what was happening under my own roof?" The defamation case moved fast, too fast. Grace's lawyers were media savvy. They painted her as a woman who'd snapped under the weight of emotional exhaustion. Her photos appeared online, humble, teary-eyed, dressed in plain clothes. And Ethan, he became the villain, the billionaire tyrant who'd used his status to destroy a woman's livelihood. The public loves a villain, especially one who looks rich enough to hate. He tried to stay silent, to rise above it, but silence is a dangerous form of dignity in a noisy world. At dinner one evening, Lily asked a question that cut deeper than any accusation. "Daddy, did you hurt Miss Grace?" Ethan froze. His knife clattered onto the plate. He looked at his daughter, her eyes searching for truth. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "I didn't hurt her. She hurt you." But Lily didn't understand. Not yet. How could she? To a child, love and trust look the same, until they don't. By now, Ethan's empire was feeling the tremors. Business partners began to distance themselves. Charitable foundations postponed projects. Reporters waited outside his gates like vultures. He stood before the mirror one night, the headlines glowing on his phone. Grace Turner, the maid who stood up to a billionaire. Each headline was a lie, but lies are louder than truth when fueled by outrage. He turned off the phone and looked at his reflection, and for the first time, he didn't see a billionaire. He saw a father cornered by a world that feeds on drama more than justice. He whispered, almost to himself, "If the system won't protect my children, I will." He called his lawyer. "We're filing our own suit," he said, "not just to clear my name, but to expose how deep this manipulation runs." And so the battle lines were drawn, not between a man and his maid, but between truth and perception, power and narrative. Ethan had the evidence. Grace had the sympathy, and the world loved a tragedy more than it loved facts. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every parent who trusted the wrong person, every home that looked perfect on the outside but carried secrets within. As he tucked Lily and Max into bed that night, he kissed their foreheads softly. The storm outside rumbled like a warning, lightning flickering against the mansion's walls. He whispered, "No one, no system, no lie, will ever take this home from you again." And in his heart, a quiet fire began to burn, the kind that doesn't just seek justice, it demands it. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It felt like the sky itself was mourning something. Ethan sat in the study again, the same desk, the same lamp, but this time, the walls seemed closer. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a name under attack. Every major outlet had picked up the story. Cavendish family scandal. Grace Turner breaks her silence. They aired clips of Grace's tearful interviews, her soft voice trembling as she spoke of years of quiet service, of how she had been emotionally mistreated. The footage of the real abuse, the recording Ethan made, had been sealed by lawyers, declared private evidence. The truth was buried beneath layers of public sympathy and clickbait headlines. Lily and Max were withdrawn now. Lily no longer came downstairs for breakfast. Max would stare at the rain, silent, drawing shapes on the window with his finger. When Ethan tried to talk to them, they listened, but their eyes carried fear. The trust that once connected them had cracked, not because they didn't love him, but because the world had made them doubt love itself. One night, he found Lily in her room, curled up on the floor beside her bed. Her small voice was barely a whisper. "I don't want to be rich, Daddy. I just want to be happy again." That line, simple, innocent, cut deeper than any lawsuit could. Ethan sat beside her, trying to find words, but what could he say? How do you explain to a child that sometimes the cruelest people are those we let too close? He pulled her into his arms and whispered, "You will be, sweetheart, I promise. Daddy's going to fix everything." But he didn't know how. Days blurred into each other. Ethan stopped attending meetings. He stopped shaving. His once perfect routine dissolved into sleepless nights and scattered thoughts. His phone buzzed endlessly. Lawyers, PR advisors, journalists, all with opinions on how to manage the damage. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't about damage control. It was about betrayal control. Then came the letter, a court notice, Grace's legal team demanding a public apology and a settlement. She wanted money, not just money, vindication. Daniel, his security chief, slammed the papers on the desk. "She's using the system against you, Ethan. You expose her cruelty, and now she's the victim? It's madness." Ethan said nothing, because he already knew, power and truth didn't always play on the same side. He'd spent years in boardrooms where influence shaped reality, but he never imagined that same distortion would enter his own home. That night, Ethan poured another drink and walked through the empty mansion. The echoes of his children's laughter used to fill these halls. Now all he heard was the dull click of his shoes on marble. He passed the portrait in the hallway, his late wife, smiling softly. He stopped, staring at it. The weight of loneliness pressed against his chest. "You'd know what to do," he whispered to her photo. "You always did." He sank to the floor, the glass still in his hand. For the first time in years, Ethan Cavendish, billionaire, visionary, father, cried. Not the quiet kind, the kind that strips away everything you thought made you strong. Tears fell into his glass as he whispered into the dark, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I failed them, failed everyone." The storm outside answered with thunder. He pressed his hand to his face, and for a moment, he wished he could just disappear, not as an escape, but as mercy. Mercy from the noise, from the lies, from the feeling of watching his children flinch when he entered a room. The next morning, he found Max sitting by the window, watching the rain again. Without turning, Max said quietly, "Daddy, Grace said you only love us because Mammy died. Is that true?" Ethan's breath caught. He sat beside him, his voice breaking. "No, Max, I loved you from the moment I saw you, from the moment you opened your eyes. Don't ever believe anything else." But the question hung in the air, poisonous, impossible to erase. Ethan realized then, he wasn't just fighting for his reputation, he was fighting for his children's memories of who he was, and that was a war he couldn't afford to lose. That evening, alone in the study, Ethan turned off the lights and stared at the darkness. It wasn't anger that filled him now, it was emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes when you've done everything right and still lost everything that matters. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, allowed himself to feel the pain fully, not push it away, not bury it beneath logic. In his mind, he saw flashes. Lily's first steps, Max's first drawing of their family, stick figures under a smiling sun, his wife, laughing in the kitchen before cancer stole her away. He had built empires from ambition, but those moments, those were his real kingdom, and he had failed to protect it. Then, quietly, he whispered, half a confession, half a vow, "Maybe I needed to lose everything, to remember what truly matters." The rain softened outside, the storm was ending, but inside Ethan, something was beginning to shift, a fragile thread of clarity weaving through the despair. He realized that Grace's betrayal wasn't the end of his story, it was the mirror reflecting what power had made him forget, that justice is not about control, it's about responsibility. That night, before bed, he tucked Lily and Max in again. He didn't promise them revenge, or victory, or even justice. He promised something quieter. "No one can take away who we are," he said softly. "Not lies, not money, not fear. As long as we love each other, we're already winning." Max smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. It was small, fragile, but it was hope. And that was enough. The morning light that poured into the Cavendish mansion felt different, gentler, honest. For the first time in months, Ethan wasn't hiding from it. He'd spent weeks lost in grief. But now, something inside him had clicked into place. It wasn't anger anymore, it was purpose. The world had called him a villain. Let them. He would prove them wrong, not with words, but with truth. Ethan began with what he did best, precision. He locked himself in his study and reviewed everything Daniel had gathered. Phone records, emails, bank transactions. He noticed patterns that others had missed. Grace hadn't acted alone. A journalist named Clive Hensley, a manipulative tabloid editor known for exploiting vulnerable sources, had been paying her for over a year. The deposits were small, hidden as consulting fees, but consistent. Clive had built entire stories from her bitterness, shaping her resentment into headlines. It was all there, buried in the data, proof that Grace hadn't been a victim of the powerful, she'd been a weapon for them. Ethan's eyes burned with new fire. This wasn't just about defending his name anymore. This was about exposing a machine that profited from destroying people. He picked up the phone. "Daniel, we're not reacting anymore. We're going on the offensive." Meanwhile, the children had started to heal, slowly. Lily had returned to her piano lessons, and Max began drawing again. Their laughter, though soft, was returning to the halls. Ethan made sure of it. He was home every evening, not as the CEO of Cavendish Industries, but as their father, the man who read bedtime stories and listened without checking his phone. He realized something powerful. To rebuild the world, he first had to rebuild the home, and that was where true justice began. Weeks passed, and Ethan worked quietly, methodically. He reached out to an investigative journalist he trusted, Nora Vance, a woman known for exposing corruption in high places. She'd once written an honest article about him years ago, portraying him not as a billionaire, but as a man who had built his fortune ethically. When she picked up the phone, her tone was cautious. "Ethan Cavendish, I didn't expect this call. I wouldn't make it," he said, "unless I had something worth hearing." He met her in a small cafe downtown, away from the cameras. No entourage, no luxury, just truth. He slid a USB drive across the table, evidence of the payments, the manipulation, and Grace's cooperation with the tabloids. Nora listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled through the data. "This changes everything," she whispered. "It's all yours," Ethan said, "but one condition, tell it truthfully, not for me, for them." He glanced at a photo of Lily and Max in his wallet. For a moment, Nora said nothing, then she nodded. "You have my word." Days later, Nora's article went live. The manufactured victim, how a tabloid machine framed a billionaire father. It was thorough, fair, honest. It showed the recordings, with the children's faces blurred, and revealed the money trail connecting Grace to Clive Hensley's media network. The internet erupted again, but this time, not in hate, in disbelief. People began to ask questions. Wait, so she lied? Why did the media hide the payments? Has Ethan been the victim all along? Public perception began to shift, slowly, like clouds parting after a storm. Clive Hensley, the editor who had orchestrated the smear, panicked. His legal team scrambled, issuing statements, denying involvement, but Nora had the receipts. The empire of lies began to tremble. Ethan watched it unfold with quiet resolve. He didn't gloat, he didn't lash out, he simply told the truth, one fact at a time. For the first time in months, he felt lightness return to his chest, but deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Grace still hadn't faced accountability for what she'd done to his children. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock on the door. When Ethan opened it, Grace was standing there. She looked nothing like the woman who once ruled his household with quiet control. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes swollen. She held herself like someone who'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mr. Cavendish," she whispered, "please, I just want to talk." Ethan didn't move. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, two lives intertwined by betrayal and regret. "Talk," he said finally, his voice flat. Grace stepped forward, trembling. "I never meant to hurt them. I was so angry, watching you, your perfect life, your perfect family, and I thought, if I couldn't have that kind of love, maybe I could at least take it down. I know it's not an excuse, but," Ethan cut her off gently, "you didn't just take something from me, Grace, you took something from them, their trust, their innocence." Her voice broke. "I know, I see it now, and it kills me." Tears spilled down her face. "Please, I can't live with this guilt." He studied her for a long moment, and in that silence, something inside him shifted again, not forgiveness, but understanding. "Grace," he said quietly, "I'm not the one you need forgiveness from. It's Lily and Max, and maybe, yourself." She nodded slowly, defeated, then turned and walked away. It would be the last time he ever saw her. A week later, the case was dropped. The court dismissed Grace's claim after Nora's article exposed the manipulation. Ethan's name was cleared, but more importantly, his children's names were safe again. And yet, he didn't celebrate, because justice, he'd learned, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like peace, quiet, steady, humble peace. That night, he gathered Lily and Max in the study, the same place where he'd once felt helpless. The chandelier above them glowed warmly, casting soft gold light across their faces. He sat on the floor beside them, no barriers, no distance. "Do you know why I fought so hard?" he asked gently. Lily shook her head. "Because you're rich," Max offered, half serious. Ethan smiled faintly. "No, Because I love you, and because no one, not anyone, has the right to make you feel small, not even someone you trust. Lily looked up at him, her eyes soft. Even if they say they love you, especially then, he said. He pulled them close. For the first time, it felt like his home was whole again. Not perfect, but whole. And that was enough. He had rediscovered something he'd long forgotten. Power isn't about domination, it's about protection. The next morning, he stood at the edge of his property, watching the sunrise spread across the city skyline. The same skyline he had once ruled with ambition now looked different, smaller, gentler. He whispered to himself, "Justice doesn't make you powerful, it reminds you to be human." A month had passed since Nora's article had changed everything. Grace had retreated into silence, the tabloids had gone quiet, and the Cavendish estate had started breathing again. But Ethan knew something: when power is built on lies, it doesn't die easily. It hides, it waits. Clive Hensley, the tabloid editor, hadn't faced any real consequences yet. His media group had issued a vague apology, promised an internal review, and continued publishing new scandals. The world had moved on, but Ethan hadn't. He couldn't. This wasn't just about his own vindication anymore. It was about every person the media machine had destroyed without consequence. He had evidence, he had reach, and this time, he had purpose. He called Nora. "You wrote the story, now I want to show people what this system really looks like." "You mean, go public?" "Exactly. Not just my story, everyone's. I want to show them what we've all become." There was a long pause. Then Nora said quietly, "You understand what you're starting, right? Once you speak publicly, you'll be a target again. Let them aim." Ethan replied, "I'm done hiding." The day of the confrontation came quietly. A charity gala in downtown Manhattan, the same kind of event that had once been Ethan's playground. Wealth, power, media, all under one chandeliered roof. But this time, he wasn't there to network. He was there to tell the truth. He arrived in a simple black suit, no entourage, no flash. As he stepped onto the stage during the Owner Airy keynote, no one quite knew what was coming. Cameras turned. The crowd hushed. Ethan Cavendish was supposed to speak about innovation and philanthropy. Instead, he spoke about corruption and conscience. He began softly, his voice steady, almost calm. "For years, I believed that success could protect me, that if I was honest, kind, and generous, the world would be fair. But the past year has taught me something different." The audience leaned in. "I learned that truth isn't something you own, it's something you defend. And sometimes, you have to defend it from the very people who profit off destroying it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He continued, "A woman I trusted betrayed my children. That's where this started. But what broke me wasn't just her cruelty, it was how quickly the world chose to believe a lie because it made for better entertainment." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive, the same one that had exposed the bribery and manipulation. "This," he said, holding it up, "is evidence of how stories like mine are made, how truth is edited, sold, and recycled for profit. Every name, every payment, every script of deceit." He placed it on the podium. "I'm making it public. Every document, every recording, every proof. No more secrets." For a moment, there was silence, the kind that hums before a storm. Then applause, hesitant at first, then growing, louder, unstoppable. Not the applause of admiration, but of awakening. Some faces in the crowd turned pale: media executives, lawyers, corporate figures who suddenly realized what this meant. This wasn't a speech, it was a declaration. After the event, chaos followed. News outlets scrambled to cover the revelation, but this time, the narrative couldn't be twisted. Ethan had anticipated that. The files were already uploaded to multiple secure servers, released to public platforms through independent journalists. The truth was free, and it was louder than ever. Clive Hensley tried to fight back. He went live on television, trying to frame Ethan as a rich man's crusade for sympathy, but this time, people didn't buy it. Other former employees from the tabloid industry came forward, confessing to their own manipulations. Anonymous sources leaked more evidence, and the facade began to collapse. Within weeks, investigations were opened. Clive's company faced legal scrutiny, and the network of corruption surrounding it started unraveling. Ethan watched it unfold from home, not with pride, but with quiet relief. He hadn't sought revenge, he'd sought truth, and that difference mattered. Still, victory came at a cost. Reporters camped outside his home again. Old business partners distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with controversy. But Ethan didn't care. He had learned that peace doesn't come from being untouchable, it comes from being uncompromising. One night, sitting by the fireplace, Nora visited him again. She handed him a printed article. Ethan Cavendish, the man who fought a machine. He read it quietly, then looked up. You made me sound like a hero. You are one, Nora said softly. He shook his head. No, I'm just a father who refused to let lies raise his children. The next morning, he took Lily and Max for a walk through the gardens. The air smelled of fresh rain. Lily skipped ahead, her hair catching the sunlight. Max looked up at his father. Daddy, are we safe now? Ethan crouched down beside him. We are, Max, but more importantly, we're strong. And that's something no one can take. Lily stopped by a rosebush and plucked a single red bloom. Can we give this to Mommy? She asked softly. Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. Yes, sweetheart, let's put it by her photo when we get home. For the first time in what felt like forever, his heart didn't ache when he thought of his wife. It felt at peace, because he had finally lived the kind of courage she always believed he had. But even peace demands sacrifice. By choosing truth, Ethan had given up the comfort of anonymity. He would forever be remembered not as the billionaire who built an empire, but as the man who exposed one. And that was enough. He stood at the edge of his property, watching the sunset bleed gold across the horizon. He thought of everything he'd lost: reputation, alliances, privacy. But then he thought of what he gained: clarity, strength, and the unshakable love of his children. He smiled, just slightly, and whispered, let them write what they want. The truth already wrote its ending.